I just spilled coffee all over my white throat. Yeah, that's nice. I'm well happy I did that. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Harmony Nice and today I'm going to be doing another unsolved mystery video, and I'm so freaking ecstatic to actually be starting these videos once a week now. If you guys didn't see my Instagram post or mukbang that I put up, I'm going to be uploading these unsolved mystery videos once a week, in addition to my 2 other normal videos a week as well, which is super exciting. So please keep up the support on these videos if you enjoy them, like them, suggest cases that you would like to see and things like that, including paranormal cases as well. I know it's working and that you guys actually like it. Today we're going to be talking about the absolutely crazy unsolved mystery of Dorothy Scott, and this is probably the weirdest case I've ever researched before, just because so much of it doesn't add up and it's really interesting, and I feel like it's really important to talk about as well. It's just one of the craziest murders I've ever heard about. So with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Grab yourself a hot cup of coffee and spill it everywhere you want. Let's just hop right into the video. On May 28th, 1980, Dorothy Scott disappeared from Anaheim, California from a hospital. Anaheim, California was where Dorothy and her son lived, and prior to the disappearance, Dorothy was 32 years old and she was a single mother to her 4-year-old son called Sean. Dorothy worked as a secretary at 2 places, a swingers psych shop and John's custom head shop, I believe they're called. Dorothy was described as quiet and religious, as well as didn't take drugs or didn't drink. Rarely dated anybody as well. She was very quiet and really just focused on her 4-year-old son. Nor did she really go out the house or leave the house for anything other than work, not really ever like recreational purposes. I also believe that she lived with her aunt, which is something I read online, but I only read that once somewhere, so I'm not 100% sure if that is true. And she worked from morning until evening, where her parents took care of her little boy Sean when she was at work. From what I'm aware, she was an extremely lovely person who was really highly loved by everybody and appreciated by everybody for her like willingness to give to people. In the year 1980, which is the year Dorothy disappeared, Dorothy began receiving anonymous phone calls to her home phone and also to her work placement. They were super creepy calls. This anonymous caller would be either like super complimentary to her and like obsess her and like swoon over her and things like that, or he would be extremely threatening and really angry over these phone calls. And the caller would also make Dorothy aware that he knew about her whereabouts at all times. So he would explain what she was wearing that day and things like that, tell her that he could see her from different places, give information about her day-to-day life that nobody else would know unless they were actually watching her. I read somewhere as well that apparently once he told her to go outside of her house and look at her car, and apparently there was just one single dead rose sitting on her car, which is just super. He also made a threat to Dorothy once. I believe this is one of the last calls from him towards Dorothy, where he said, "Okay, now you're going to come my way. When I get you alone, I will cut you up and no one will be able to find you." Which actually made Dorothy begin to take self-defense classes like karate and things like that. And she also considered buying a gun, but she decided against buying a gun since she didn't want her 4-year-old son Sean to actually get hold of the gun and end up injuring himself. Dorothy also stated that the voice of the man that was calling her was recognizable, but she could never ever pinpoint or put her finger on who this person actually was. But it is believed that Dorothy definitely knew the caller in some way. A couple of things that aren't clear about this is firstly whether Dorothy actually ever reported this to the police. She may have done, she may have not, nothing may have ever been done about it. And also it's not 100% clear whether the calls stopped like a long time before her murder or they didn't stop until right up to the date of her murder. But from a few sources that I read, I believe that it stopped like very close to her day of her disappearance. On the evening of Dorothy's disappearance on May 28th, Dorothy actually dropped her son off at her parents' house, Jacob and Vera Scott, because she was attending a staff meeting at one of these shops around 9 p.m. that evening. During the meeting, Dorothy had noticed that one of her co-workers, Conrad Bostron, I believe his name is pronounced, began to look very ill, and he was super uneasy the whole time and couldn't stop moving around, and you could tell that he was getting increasingly more unwell. And it became clear to them and to Dorothy that there was a large red streak on his arm that was getting increasingly worse, kind of like a large red rash. And Dorothy was super worried about this rash. She was super worried about Conrad, so she convinced Conrad to go get it checked out at the hospital, and she convinced him to let her drive him to the hospital as well. So Dorothy took Conrad and also another one of her co-workers, Pam, to the hospital to get this rash checked out. On the way to the hospital, apparently Dorothy stopped at her parents' house to tell her parents that she was going to go to the hospital and that she was going to be back late because she had to take him to the hospital, which I think is kind of odd considering obviously it could have been something major. But anyway, she warned them about that, and during this time also she changed her black scarf to a red scarf, which kind of is an odd thing to do and not the type of thing that you would think of doing in an emergency. Dorothy continued to drive them both to the UCI medical center where they went to go get Conrad's rash checked out. It was concluded that Conrad had actually been bitten by a black widow spider, where Conrad could literally, in no sense of the word, work out where this black widow spider could have come from. Dorothy and Pam stayed put while Conrad got this treated, and they sat next to each other in the waiting room reading and talking about stuff, and Pam said that at no point did Dorothy leave her side. Conrad was discharged around 11 p.m, but some sources say it was kind of more nearer 12 p.m, and then the three went to go to the pharmacy line to wait for Conrad's medication that he needed to take. And Dorothy offered to pull the car around the front of the hospital so that Conrad didn't have to walk very far to the car since he was in a very, very bad state. So Dorothy left the two to go pull the car around the front. Apparently Dorothy did use the bathroom before leaving the building, and also Pam and Conrad apparently both used the bathroom before leaving the building as well. Then Pam and Conrad stepped outside the front of the building, and surprisingly Dorothy wasn't around the front of the building yet. Since it wasn't actually that far away from the front of the building, her car, they still just waited there for a bit, didn't really think anything of it. They've been waiting there for around 10 to 20 minutes when they finally saw Dorothy's car, which was a 1973 white Toyota station wagon. But when they spotted the car was driving towards them at absolutely top speed, like zooming towards them with the headlights on full beam, so they couldn't see the driver of the car. And Pam and Conrad were waving at the car just in case Dorothy had missed them or something like that. But the car like zoomed straight past them, got to the end of the road, made a right turn, turned its headlights off and just kept going. And Pam and Conrad were obviously super confused about what had happened, and they couldn't really believe why she had done this or anything like that. I believe they thought that maybe that there had been an emergency with Sean, her son, so that she had to quickly leave really quickly. That really didn't explain why she couldn't have just stopped and told them that there was an emergency, or even just picked them up really quickly. Like, it doesn't make sense. It didn't make any sense considering she literally stopped at her parents' house to tell her parents that she was going to be late at the hospital, and had time to stop for something like that, but didn't have time to just pick up, you know, Conrad, who was in a really bad state, and Pam. So it is believed that Dorothy was not the driver. Both of them waited an hour or two expecting Dorothy to hopefully come back for them, because remember at this point there was no such thing as mobile phones. And apparently they called Dorothy's parents because they knew the number of Jacob, her father, because he used to own one of the head shops that they worked at. I believe they were like a maintenance man for the shop sometimes, so they had his number. So they called her parents and to ask if they had seen her, if she had come home, but they had not. They had not seen her since she had came home earlier to tell them they were going to the hospital. Not long after that, Pam and Conrad called the police and reported Dorothy as missing. And obviously the concern for her well-being began, but there was not much concern for the police at this time. For all they know, Dorothy could have just like sped off without them or something like that. There was nothing to prove that she was in any danger. Just a few hours later at 4:40 a.m, Dorothy's car was found down an alleyway in Santa Ana, only 10 miles away from the UCI hospital. And the car was completely on fire, and Dorothy was not inside. There was nothing else of any relevance in the burning car. Through the next week, the police convinced her parents, Jacob and Vera, not to contact the papers or anything like that. I'm not quite sure why, whether they just thought they might have a better chance of finding her in this week if they didn't contact the papers or something like that, which I think is crazy, because I think, you know, the sooner they reported the papers, the sooner they're going to get people with statements, witnesses and things like that, but they didn't want them to for some reason. And nothing was found of Dorothy throughout this whole entire week. At the end of this week, Dorothy's mother received a phone call, and this was the start of many phone calls from the same male voice, it is believed, that was calling Dorothy. And during this phone call, the unidentified male asked Vera whether she was related to Dorothy, and when Vera answered yes, he stated that I've got her, and then just hung up the phone. And obviously at this point, nobody other than her close friends and family knew that Dorothy was actually missing, so it's believed that he was the one responsible for Dorothy's disappearance. After this, from what I read, it took another week for Jacob and Vera to kind of run out of patience with the deal that they had with the police about not going to the papers and anything like that, and like rightfully bloody so. So they decided to contact the Santa Ana Register to run the story on Dorothy's disappearance. The day the story ran about Dorothy's disappearance, the actual editor from the Santa Ana Register, Pat Riley, received an anonymous phone call from what is believed to be the same unidentified male voice that called Vera and Dorothy. I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her. The caller also knew facts about that night, like Conrad Bostrom having the spider's bite and having to go to the hospital, and also details about what Dorothy is wearing, including the red scarf, which neither of these details were published in the article about Dorothy. These were completely unknown other than the people that were involved. The anonymous caller also stated that apparently Dorothy called this unidentified male to let him know about her where-being at the time, telling him where she was, but according to Pam, this could not have been true because Dorothy didn't leave her side at any point other than to go to the toilet when she went to go get the car around the front, which, remember, again, at this time mobiles didn't exist, so she couldn't have gone to the toilet to call anybody because it just wasn't possible. And yeah, she could have maybe gone off to use a payphone, but I feel like someone would have seen her there, or maybe Pam would have realised that she was going to a payphone or something like that. So according to Pam, this is completely false. So after this, the police investigated a lot, and all the leads that they had kind of fizzled out. There wasn't really any suspects or anything like that. But the anonymous phone calls from this unidentified male voice continued every single Wednesday for the next 4 years to Dorothy's parents' house, Vera and Jacob. The anonymous caller would either ask if Dorothy was home, saying that he had killed Dorothy, or literally just say, I got her. The calls always came on Wednesday during the day, just when Vera was home, so he always spoke to Vera. The police had taped and tried to trace the phone call, but the calls were always so short they were pretty much untraceable. And the calls finally stopped on April 1984, where instead of Vera answering the phone, Jacob answered the phone, and apparently the caller just hung up. Around 3 months after the phone calls had ended on August the 6th, 1984, almost 4 years after Dorothy's disappearance, a construction worker came across some remains on a construction site that they were working on along the Santa Ana Road in Anaheim. The bone remains that were found firstly started with dog remains, and then under a light little bit of soil underneath the dog remains were a human skull, a pelvis, 2 thighs and an arm. The bones were tested, and a week later these were confirmed to be Dorothy Scott's remains. Although Vera had already identified one of Dorothy's turquoise rings that she always wore, and also Dorothy's watch that she wore that actually stopped on May 29th, 1980 at 12:30 a.m, which was the day after Dorothy had disappeared. They would believe that she was buried underneath some dog's remains, either because the person that had killed her liked to kill animals as well, or because they wanted to hide the fact that Dorothy was there by using dog remains as well, so it just kind of looked like animal remains. They tried to hide it up because of that, which I don't know if it's true or not. Or apparently some people say that it was a metaphor for like cheating or something and like being an animal, which is absolutely ridiculous. I don't really believe that at all. Dorothy literally seemed like such a sweetheart. I don't know. After the body was found and it was brought to the public that the body was found, Dorothy's parents, Vera and Jacob, got 2 more phone calls from this familiar voiced man that had been calling them for years and years before, and both times they just asked if Dorothy was home. The cause of death was apparently not concluded. There was no blunt force trauma to the head or anything like that, so it was inconclusive how she had actually died. And once again, the only motive for the murder that they could find is that anonymous tip of someone saying that she had cheated and that he had done it because of that. Now that's all the actual information that I have on the case. So let's get to the theories and the suspects section of this video, which is what makes this case so crazy, is that her body was found and there's still no more evidence on what happened to Dorothy, like how she died or anything like that. And no arrests were ever made, which is crazy. With situations like this, especially when a young single mother dies, there's usually loads and loads of people that have been arrested, there's loads of suspects, people that are expected to do this, evidence like against people, but there really never was. But I'm gonna still share what is believed to be the suspects and the theories anyway. So obviously the main theory, and kind of really the only theory, is that she was kidnapped by this phone stalker that she had prior months before, which obviously from my opinion is the most believable. The main kind of theory being that he could have created a fake relationship in his head with Dorothy because of his insanity and became absolutely obsessed with her. When he saw Dorothy driving with Conrad to the hospital, he may have mistaken this for Dorothy's boyfriend, and that could have angered him, so he could have waited in the parking lot to wait for her to kidnap her and kill her. It is believed that this person who was stalking her or that kidnapped her and killed her was somebody that Dorothy knew, but there is a couple of suspects in this case, so I'm just going to tell you them now. The first theory and suspect is that Dorothy was killed by her ex-husband, whose name I literally couldn't find for anything, and he was the father of Sean, her son. And he was the first suspect that the police turned to when investigating Dorothy's disappearance. However, he actually had a really strong alibi for the night that Dorothy was kidnapped, and he was at his home in Missouri, I believe it's pronounced, and it does kind of debunk him being there. But the only other theory against him doing this, and that he was a stalker and responsible for Dorothy's death, and that Dorothy recognised his voice down the phone because it was her ex-husband and it was a familiar voice, and obviously he knew her very well, he probably knew what she did for a job, etc. He was an ex-husband, he lived with her, he knew her routines and things like that. And obviously the unidentified man said that she had cheated on him, which could indicate that they were in a relationship at a point, and then she was unfaithful to him, and then they were not in a relationship, and maybe he found out after they'd broken up or something like that, that indicated they could have been in a relationship. And this will also explain why the killer claimed that Dorothy called him from the hospital, because she could have done and let him know about his whereabouts, and that would make sense why she would do that, because it's Sean's father. But again, this theory to me just really doesn't add up. I personally don't believe it. It was all kind of debunked, and I feel like Dorothy would definitely recognise her ex-husband's voice down the phone, and also her dad would definitely recognise her ex-husband's voice down the phone. And so would Vera. I just don't believe that it's just not, I don't believe it. And also he has an alibi, and according to a lot of sources, Dorothy's ex-husband loved her very much. But I still think it's a theory worth noting if people have something to elaborate on that on. And the next and the only other suspect is the one I personally believe, and I can't believe the police haven't looked into this more than they have. It happened a long time ago, but so did a lot of other things, and they still should be researched in my opinion. This theory about this specific man came to light in an interview or a conversation between a blogger and also Dorothy's son, Sean. He brought up a name that he believed was a prime suspect in his mother's murder and disappearance, a man called Mike Butler. Apparently, Sean had spoke to some of Dorothy's old friends, and according to them, Mike Butler was a brother of a lady who also worked at the same place that Dorothy did in the shop. So one of the female co-workers of Dorothy. I can't find her name, but apparently she's kind of famous, which is odd, but I still couldn't find who it was, which is again another thing that I'm going to mention which makes it even weirder. And from what I read, apparently Mike Butler was a super unstable man who was into cults and in general super sketchy according to a lot of people. And according to some of Dorothy's old friends, he was obsessed with Dorothy. Again, there's not a ton of evidence to kind of back up that he had done this, but there is some weird things that connect him to the story. Firstly, it makes sense that Mike would know about Dorothy's well-being at all times, since obviously his sister worked with Dorothy, and a lot of people, like a lot of co-workers from Dorothy, knew this man, so that kind of makes sense that he would know Dorothy's routine and work schedule and things like that. It also makes sense why he would know about Dorothy's where being the night of the disappearance, because obviously if he knew that his sister was going to a work meeting, he knew that Dorothy would be attending it too. Another really interesting fact to this case that I think personally relates someone like Mike to this theory is that how did the killer get to the hospital? If this was premeditated, which I believe it was, I don't think this is a coincidence at all. Either this person must have walked to the hospital, which may have been impossible to follow Dorothy while she was driving to the hospital. They must have already been at the hospital, or somebody must have dropped them off, which definitely means that I think more than one person would know who this is, unless it was a complete stranger that did this. But I don't think that would happen. I literally think, no, I think that there is a lot more to it than we know there is. Also, like I stated, Dorothy's father, Jacob, was a maintenance man for the shop and also apparently owned the shop. So it kind of makes sense that Mike may have crossed paths with Jacob at some point. Obviously, if his sister worked there and things like that, he may have met him, may have crossed paths with them at some point. So if he had called Vera for all of those years, Vera may have not recognised his voice, whereas the only time that Jacob picked up, he may have been like, oh shit, like he may recognise my voice, so he hung up. And this also could be the reason that Dorothy recognised this man's voice, because obviously he was an acquaintance to Dorothy, Dorothy knew of him. Obviously she couldn't recognise his voice because it was an acquaintance. It wasn't like someone she saw every single day, but it was someone that she knew of, which could make sense to me. And he also kind of ties into my theory that this, you know, insane stalker person could have made up a fake relationship with Dorothy in his head. You know, obviously he was kind of known to be an unstable man. He could have, you know, easily thought he was in a relationship with Dorothy in his head, and it ties into the theory of he may have seen Conrad in the car with her and, you know, thought, oh, that's, you know, she's cheating on me or whatever, because that's what he thought in his head. It clicked him and he got really angry and got there somehow and just made him break. Also, apparently, according to this statement from Dorothy Scott's son, Sean, apparently he tried to contact Mike's sister for years and years, but she always ignored him. She always, you know, saw his messages and ignored them, didn't reply, didn't get back to him, things like that, and wouldn't give him any answers. It's just crazy because, like, it's Sean's life. Like, he doesn't have any answers, and it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, if I could help with something like that and I was innocent, then if I could help with something like that, like, of course I would. Like, why would you not? Apparently law enforcement were well aware of him and people had spoken to the police about him before, but there was not enough evidence to actually hold anything against him, and no arrests were ever made or anything like that, which again is mental because for me that's like case cracked. Fortunately, that is all the theories and the suspects that I have any significant evidence to, which is crazy. A lot of people were debating whether the person that did this to Dorothy could have been of quite high significance. Some people debated it could have been one of the people in the police force, which is why the police kept it so quiet for ages and asked them to keep people. Other people said it could be someone of just like greater significance, maybe like somebody who was slightly famous that had a brother that was weird. I don't know. No, I'm not saying anything because of course nothing has been proved. It could all literally just be theories on top of theories. But it's absolutely crazy there is like literally no suspects in this case other than the two that we have, which there's, you know, not enough like evidence against to prove anything. It's just really crazy to me. Like, if you know any other theories about this case, or you know anything other information about this case, please let me know. I'm really interested and I think it's super important to mention down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. That's all I have for today's case. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you later on this week with an Enchanted Endeavours episode, and I really hope you enjoyed and you enjoyed chilling with me. I'll see you soon. Bye guys. I'm Cheryl.